So let's get this straightened out. So for the second half of this lab, we'll be going over symbiosis and species interactions specifically. So the first thing that you'll want to do, and hopefully you can see this well enough, it is in the PowerPoint that I'm sending you, but you'll want to draw this diagram up on the board. Students have the same one in their own notes, and so they'll just need to fill this out as they go along, learning about different ways that animals interact together, whether it's within species or between species. So make sure they have the two terms intraspecific and interspecific straight. So intraspecific is when we're talking about members of the same species interacting together, and interspecific is when we're talking about members of different species. So make sure you go over that before you really start going through all of this. Next big thing with this portion of the lab is you want to make sure that this is really like just more of a conversation. I don't want you guys to just be lecturing about this. I really want students to be involved. I can bet that there's at least a few students in each class who have watched like the Discovery Channel or Planet Earth or whatnot, and they've probably seen examples of this just through learning through resources like that. And so I really encourage you to ask about any other examples, maybe have a few extra examples in your pocket, just to bring about a real conversation with this. So let's go and get started. So you each have a PowerPoint that I'll be sending to you, and the first example in the PowerPoint is a picture of a flower and a bee. Okay, and so with every image or every slide, you need to ask the students, where would you place this relationship in your table? Have them discuss with each other, and then also have them hypothesize how natural selection drives the evolution of both species in this relationship. And again, I really want students to come to these hypotheses on their own. Okay, so in this case, we're talking about cooperation, which is the interspecific relationship, and mutualism, which is the interspecific version of the relationship. And this is a positive, so both actor and benefit are benefiting. Actor and recipient are benefiting. Also, sorry, my puppy is barking. Anyway, and so the example that's in the slides is obviously mutualism. I also encourage you to explain some examples of cooperation. So the hard thing with cooperation examples, since they're an intraspecific, is making sure you don't give altruistic examples. A good example of cooperation could be like lions who will do like a territorial chorus, and it doesn't really put the lions in danger. It actually discourages others from disturbing the lions, and so all they need to do is sing this little chorus and it'll help protect not only them but other members of their group as well. As I said, feel free to look up other examples or think of others that you might already know. Encourage your students to think of other examples. And then mutualism, of course, is when we have two species that interact with each other and both are benefiting from whatever this is. Okay. So next we're talking about, the next slide shows spider catching some prey in its web, and then mistletoe, which is a parasite. And so this, again, have them think about where this would go in their table. What's happening is both the predator and the parasite are able to get what they need, so that's positive, but obviously it's harming the other member of this relationship. Okay. Selfishness is the intraspecific version of this, so within species. So you can ask students where they think they'd find this And they can even talk about examples in humans, where we see selfishness in humans, or else in animals that could be things like hoarding or not sharing food, or just really kind of acting on their own, but at the harm of, it harms the other members of the group. So I think like hoarding or not sharing food is a really good example of that. And you can look up more specific examples if you'd like. The next slide shows building ground squirrels and vampire bats. And so you're supposed to explain kin selection and reciprocal altruism. Really basically, this idea of kin selection is that you or a member of a population will do things to help members of their family that they're related to. The main idea is even if it harms them, maybe it'll benefit a member of their family enough that they'll be able to survive and reproduce. And so even though it won't be the actor's genome being passed on potentially, at least they're helping out someone who has at least a similar genome, if that makes sense. And then reciprocal altruism is the idea of like, I do something nice to you, you do something nice to me in the future if the opportunity arises. And so with building ground squirrels, if you haven't heard of this example before, one squirrel will kind of stand guard or stand watch, and he'll send out a call, or she, send out a call when a predator comes, ground squirrels will be eating, and then one will be standing watch. Then send out a call if a predator is coming near, and that puts the one standing on watch in danger, risking their lives, but it helps everyone else be able to survive. And then the vampire bats, vampire bats will go and they'll feed at night, and if for whatever reason one vampire bat doesn't get the food or nourishment that they need, then the other vampire bat will like actually regurgitate some of their meal, with the expectation that if the tables were switched, then the one that was given food, in this case, will give food to the other in another situation. Okay. And then you're supposed to ask if students think this exists interspecifically. And here, just have a conversation. Have them think of any time maybe that they've sacrificed themselves for a member of not the human species, and think of other examples. Overall, this isn't very common in the whole scope of evolution. It doesn't really make sense, right? With the definition of purpose is to survive and reproduce, and pass on your genes to the next generation. So if you're sacrificing yourself for the benefit of another species, it just doesn't really make sense. But it does sometimes happen, but it's not like a consistent behavioral trait that we see. And so you could give examples like I recently got a puppy, and I feel like I sacrifice a lot for the puppy, and it benefits the puppy, but the puppy isn't necessarily giving as much back to me, right? And we could even use examples of other like motherly instincts. So sometimes if a mother of one species loses an offspring or a bunch of offspring, and then also another juvenile of another species appears, sometimes that mother will kind of bring it in and raise it as their own. We also see this kind of behavior in dolphins, where they've done things to kind of help protect humans, or even other dolphin species that aren't their own. Anyway, so this is an interesting conversation to have. Ask students why that kind of behavior would even present itself with natural selection. And yeah, just have a good conversation about it. So then the next one is a picture of the clownfish in an anemone. I always struggle with that word. And so with this, the clownfish is benefiting because it gets a home, but the anemone is not affected in any way. It's just living its anemone life. And so, of course, ask why this would evolve, how it's maintained in populations, and so on and so forth. Next slide is of competition. So with this in your instructor guide, we had originally put this in the box of actor no effect and recipient is harmed. I would actually put this with spite and actor is harmed and recipient is harmed, just because in competition neither member of this relationship is benefiting. And we can see this intraspecifically and interspecifically. As you know, as individuals are competing for resources, it's expending a lot of energy, and both are experiencing this struggle, right? Whatever the resource is that they're looking for. So again, put competition in the negative box, okay? Also in that box is spite. We only see spite intraspecies, but even then, it's pretty much only in humans. Anyway, talk about this with the class. Spite is like purposely harming yourself to harm someone else, or another member of the population. Ask if this exists interspecies, and just really have like a big conversation about spite. And I would say spite is a little bit different from competition because it's like consciously harming yourself to also harm another member. Anyway, so just have a big conversation about that. And then lastly, we have amentualism. And with this, the relationship is the recipient is harmed and the actor has no effect. And so a good example for that I like to think of is like elephants, obviously have big feet, right? And if you're something smaller than an elephant and you're getting in the path, that elephant will probably greatly injure you or wipe you out, but it doesn't do any harm to the elephant. And you can ask students if they can think of any other examples of this, and then of course ask about how this is maintained through natural selection, how it's evolved, and then you could even talk about ways that the recipient species could evolve or have evolved to kind of avoid this danger, right, of amentualism. And I think that is everything. So again, this part of the lab, it's a little different from other labs, and I really just encourage you to have a conversation. Study up on these terms beforehand because you'll likely and hopefully get a lot of questions, and be a little flexible. Don't be afraid to stretch out the conversation if you need to, or kind of go through it quickly if you need to, and really judge how your students are doing with these terms. So hope you enjoy this lab, and let me know if you have any questions.